John Bolton is out as White House National Security Advisor, fired like many former Trumpers via Twitter. Or at least that's how the president tells it, though Bolton remembers things a little differently. A few minutes after Trump tweeted he asked John for his resignation, John tweeted, "I offered to resign last night and President Trump said, let's talk about it tomorrow." Guess he meant they were going to talk on Twitter. But however it happened, it was a long time coming, according to many in the administration.
John Bolton's priorities and policies just don't line up with the president's.
Like when Bolton wanted to bomb Iran after an American surveillance drone was shot down and Trump opted not to. Or when Bolton warned Trump not to cross the border into North Korea during a meeting at the demilitarized zone in June, and Trump did it anyway. And most recently when Bolton warned against holding secret talks with the Taliban at Camp David last weekend. Ultimately, as you know, Trump did cancel the meeting. But then days later, Bolton was out, and now the search is on for the fourth national security advisor. The Trump administration isolated chaos or symptomatic of our foreign policy on September 11th, 2019. Joining me now is retired Army Colonel Andrew Bacevich. He's the president of the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft, funded in part by George Soros and Charles Koch, and the author of the forthcoming book, The Age of Illusions, How America Squandered Its Cold War Victory. It's good to see you, as always.
Thank you.
You wrote, I think in the New York Daily News, that America should be thanking Trump, the President of the United States, for dumping John Bolton. Why?
Well, Bolton's a warmonger. There's no question about that. As a matter of fact, I dare say that from Bolton's perspective, the biggest disappointment of his tenure is that he was not able to engineer a war between the United States and Iran. So I think it's a good day for the Republic when he departs from the White House.
As I said, one of the major areas of disagreement, there were many, was the divide over negotiating with the Taliban. Should we be negotiating with the Taliban?
Well, we should get out of Afghanistan. This is the longest war in our history. We're not going to win that war. We continue to have American soldiers be killed in what is a futile effort. So in that sense, we need to get out. Now, the negotiations that have been ongoing, let's understand what they are about. They are not about trying to arrange anything like a lasting peace. They are about providing a certain amount of cover for the Trump administration and more broadly for the United States to make it look like we're leaving under our own terms, to make it look like this is something other than an epic failure.
Would you be okay with that, though, if that was the price of getting out, that there was chaos left? I mean, you said the longest war in American history. Pentagon said a couple of days ago 800,000 American troops have served at least one tour of duty, 2,400 killed, 20,000 injured.
Right.
Would you support even a chaotic, unplanned withdrawal, a la what you think Trump will be doing?
Well, your crystal ball is clearer than mine if you know that what's going to happen when we leave is chaos. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen, but it does seem to me at the end of the day, we have to leave it to the Afghans to determine their future, and they will do so. It would be great if they could do so, and that would result in some kind of reconciliation between the Taliban and the rest of the population. But if we stay, all we're doing is prolonging a war that, again, is unwinnable.
You know, I want to ask you a why question that probably is unanswerable. Here is Barack Obama in a White House address in 2011, President Obama.
Our troops will continue coming home at a steady pace as Afghan security forces move into the lead. By 2014, this process of transition will be complete, and the Afghan people will be responsible for their own security.
And here is Citizen Trump just 2 years later. We've wasted an enormous amount of blood and treasure in Afghanistan. Their government has zero appreciation. Let's get out. Almost nothing do these two men agree upon. They agreed upon that. They actually agree with you, it appears. Why haven't we gotten out?
Well, it's hard to admit that you made a mistake. It's hard when you are the ostensibly the greatest power on the planet. It's hard to admit that the war was misbegotten. It's hard to admit that, this is the reality, it's hard to admit that all those Americans who died or have been wounded, that was for naught. It's hard to admit that roughly $1 trillion that we expended in the course of this war has produced almost nothing of value. Who wants to sign up and say, yeah, I'll own that? there aren't too many people in Washington willing to do so.
Okay, so 18 years, as we both said, obviously after the attacks. What is the state of our foreign policy? Or let me rephrase that. Do we have a foreign policy in September of 2019?
I think not. To have a foreign policy, you have to have a worldview. You have to have a set of principles. You have to have an agreed upon definition of what your interests are, a hierarchy of interests. This is really important. This is less important. I don't think that President Trump himself has the capability to come to those sorts of judgments. So what we have is make it up as we go along. What we have is the president tweeting and therefore contradicting what his subordinates may have said yesterday or the day before. There is no U.S. foreign policy.
I think Donald Trump would say he fashions himself as an anti-interventionist. I mean, he would say that. It's fair to say, I think, that you're an anti-interventionist. Is that a fair statement?
It's fair, although I think I would, slight correction, I'd probably say I'm an intervention skeptic. That is to say, there may be instances where I would favor intervention.
Well, he might say the same. I don't want to speak for Donald Trump, but he might say the same thing. So in the unlikely circumstance that you get a call in the next day or so and say you're number 4, and I'm not going to ask you if you're going. I'm serious. What would you, if you were sitting down in the Oval Office with him and he said, I want you to tell me what I should be doing for the next year or 5 years of my presidency, what would you tell him? That sort of fits within what you perceive to be, or I perceive to be, his worldview, is he doesn't like foreign entanglements.
Well, first let's acknowledge I would be wasting my breath. I would be wasting my time to travel to Washington to have this conversation.
Because of who you are, or because it doesn't matter what anybody says to him?
He doesn't care.
Okay, fine. Go ahead.
But I think what I would say is what I said just a second ago. Mr. President, we need to sit down and have a serious conversation about what matters and what doesn't matter to the well-being of our country, and more broadly, to the well-being of our planet. Mr. President, we need to establish some priorities. And once having done so, we have to have a further serious conversation, preferably with people who know more about how the world works than you know or that I know, a serious conversation to identify the actions that ought to be taken by the United States that would promote those interests.
You know, you were here, you've been here a number of times. You were here, I think it was in July of last year, and I asked you to look forward 50 years, and you said something like, he will be considered one of the least, this was your words, significant presidents ever, and I don't disagree with that. But you also said that you think the worst of Donald Trump on the foreign policy front will be reversible. Why do you believe that what Donald Trump has done with our allies and with our enemies is reversible?
Well, I mean, I think the worst thing that he has done, if we do look at our interests, the things we should be concerned about, the worst thing he's done is to ignore the threat of climate change. That's reversible in the sense that, or at least we can make up for it, in the sense that his successor could be serious about climate change. But it's not reversible at some point. I mean, if there's 4 more years of Donald Trump, I think most experts would say, on the margins possibly, but we're in pretty tough shape. I'm not a climate scientist.
Nor am I.
I imagine there is a tipping point at which nothing can be done to deal with the problem. I don't know where that tipping point is. I suspect it's more than 4 years out.
You know, we were discussing on the radio an issue today that Marjorie Egan and I talk about a lot. You serve your country. You've known thousands of. Your son gave his life for the country in Iraq. Why don't the McMasters and the Mattises, who have served their country, and so many like them, why don't they, after they leave service, if they think this president is doing such damage, stand up courageously and tell the American people what they really think?
Well, I don't know. You'd have to ask them. But as long-time military professionals, my speculation is that they're deeply invested in a particular approach to U.S. foreign policy that places great emphasis on possessing and using military power. So they are not capable of thinking critically about the way where our reliance on military power has brought us. And I think in many respects, that is the question that deserves more attention than any other. Because the fact is, here we are 18 years after 9/11. That is 18 years of misusing American military power and abusing American soldiers. And who is the politician of national stature who is willing to say that out loud and say it incessantly? I think it needs to be said.
Is there a Democrat in this field who would say that?
Tulsi Gabbard, I think. I don't follow the campaign that closely. My impression is Tulsi Gabbard does say it.
Served in Iraq?
And because she says it, she's being marginalized.
You're troubled. Well, she's being marginalized in part because she refuses to suggest that Assad of Syria is a character of questionable integrity.
Fair enough.
Before you go, the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft, before I knew you were involved, all most of America knew is a couple of strange bedfellows, Charles Koch and George Soros, were in part funding, look at the smile on your face, funding this thing. How you did that, if you want to tell us, is a miracle, but if you don't want to tell us, that's also fine. What's the mission? What's the goal of the Institute?
To change American foreign policy, to move it from a militarized emphasis on so-called global leadership that really amounts to an effort to achieve global hegemony, to move away from war, to emphasize dialogue, diplomacy, peaceful engagement, that we believe, if done well, creatively, will make the planet a better place and will make us safer and ensure our prosperity. So, you're starting up an organization, you need money, you go find people who are going to give you money. I've never met Mr. Koch, I've never met Mr. Soros. It turns out that they both basically share a belief in moving toward a more restrained approach to policy, and for that reason they've agreed to support us. We get money from a lot of other people, by the way, not just those two.
Make me a third. Good luck with your work, Andrew Bacevich. Really
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much as always.